Most men believe that to win a woman, they must speak, flatter, explain, or even beg. And yet, they lose her to the one who says nothing. Why? Because the true game is not played with words, but with presence, restraint, and power. This video will show you how to outsmart women without saying a single word. The modern man has been taught a terrible lie that his power rests in how well he communicates, how charmingly he speaks, how well he convinces. He has been led to believe that women are swayed by cleverness, by polished sentences, and endless affirmations of attention. But persuasion is the weapon of those who are uncertain. Those who know their worth do not need to explain it. And a man who explains himself, defends himself, or justifies his presence is already beneath the one who watches him in silence. In the ancient theater of male and female, persuasion is not dominance. It is desperation dressed in rhetoric. When a man persuades, he tries to change another's mind, but to try is to lack control. Power lies not in altering her thoughts, but in becoming the object she cannot define. And perception. Her perception of who you are is far more valuable than any truth you try to feed her. Consider the man who speaks only when he must, and even then with purpose. He becomes the subject of imagination, not judgment. Women cannot resist the pull of mystery, not because they are shallow, but because the psyche is drawn to ambiguity. Certainty is boring. The man who speaks his mind too easily is laid bare, predictable, obvious, no threat to the ego. But the man who walks in silence, who offers nothing and reveals even less, becomes a mirror in which she projects her fears, her fantasies, her desires. He becomes more than a man. He becomes a myth. To be perceived as powerful, one must cease to chase clarity. There is no victory in making yourself understood by all. True control comes when others wonder if they've ever known you at all. This is where persuasion dies and perception reigns. The need to speak is the need to be accepted. The man who no longer seeks acceptance is the man who controls perception entirely, because he is no longer trying to influence it. He simply is. Power in perception means living as a question mark, not an answer sheet. A man who was not easily categorized forces a woman to continue watching. She begins to study his silences, to interpret his gazes, to assign meaning to his restraint. He becomes a puzzle, and puzzles occupy the mind longer than solutions. In this sense, not speaking becomes a form of dominance. It shifts the burden of interpretation onto her, and with that burden comes emotional investment. She has already started playing the game, and he hasn't even opened his mouth. This is not about manipulation nor deceit. This is about alignment with a higher will. The will to resist the shallow need to be liked. The will to withhold your inner world from those who have not earned the right to see it. When a man possesses this will, he becomes dangerous, not in the physical sense, but in the psychological. And it is this danger that compels respect. A woman cannot test the limits of a man who does not offer the terms of engagement. He becomes unpredictable. Unpredictability is not chaos. It is authority in its rawest form. It reminds her that he is not trying to please her. He is not playing her game. He is playing his own. And in that moment, the rules shift. She begins to measure herself against him. She wonders if she has his attention. She considers what his silence means, what his gaze implies, what he sees when he looks at her. She wants to speak to him, not to understand him, but to break the quiet that holds more meaning than her words ever could. That is the unspoken shift of power. When she desires your voice, you remain in your stillness. The man who understands this does not fear being misunderstood. He welcomes it. For misunderstanding breeds curiosity, and curiosity, when directed at a man of substance, is the first step toward reverence. He is not a fool performing for approval. He does not offer explanations. He lets her interpret him as she wishes, knowing that the image in her mind is often more powerful than the reality. The moment she starts imagining who he is, she has already begun surrendering to what he represents. A man's power is not in how well he speaks, but in how much space his presence creates in others. When a woman is around a man who says little but radiates self-possession, she feels the weight of his silence. She becomes hyper, aware of her own words, her own behavior, her own need to connect, and that awareness places her in a position of pursuit. Not because he is playing hard to get, but because he is not playing at all. This is what they never teach you. A man who needs to prove nothing becomes everything, Because in a world of men who constantly advertise their value, the man who says nothing becomes the only one worth hearing. There is a kind of silence that is not absence, but assertion. It is not the silence of the coward who fears confrontation, nor the silence of the weak, who has nothing to say. It is the silence of the higher man, the man who knows that words are not always the medium of truth, but often the currency of the desperate. He speaks not because he must, but because he chooses to, and his choice is rare. His silence is not a void, it is a fortress. The ordinary man fills every space with noise. He is uncomfortable with gaps in conversation, terrified by the idea that he might not be understood, liked, or validated. He clings to language as if his survival depends on it, throwing words into the air like flares in the dark. But the higher man observes, he listens, he waits. He recognizes that silence is not emptiness. It is a force that shapes perception more deeply than speech ever could. Where others rush to explain themselves, he waits to be asked. Where others speak to connect, he withdraws to command. A woman is not unsettled by vulgarity, nor by arrogance. What unsettles her is a man who refuses to explain himself. Who does not rush to fill the silence with cheap sentiment? Who does not apologize for his existence or attempt to soften the edge of his presence? He is there, fully, unflinchingly, but without noise, and in that silence, she begins to feel her own thoughts reflected back to her. She begins to project. She begins to wonder, and wonder is far more powerful than understanding. Silence, when used with intention, is not passive. It is active resistance. It is a refusal to play by the rules of social convenience. The higher man is not interested in being liked for his charm. He does not decorate himself in agreeable words to fit in. He rejects the performance. And because of that, his presence commands attention. People lean in when he speaks because it is rare. It is deliberate. It is earned. And what is earned is always more valuable than what is freely given. A woman's psychology is attuned to energy. She does not always listen to the content of a man's words. She listens to what the words conceal. Insecurity speaks loudly, even behind a veil of confidence. But silence cannot be faked. Silence either stems from fear or from mastery. When it comes from mastery, it becomes sacred. The woman feels it before she understands it. She cannot argue with it, because there is nothing to argue against. She cannot challenge it, because it offers no foothold. It is a void that absorbs her emotional charge and returns it to her magnified. In a world saturated with self-exposure, silence becomes rebellion. Everyone talks about their plans, their trauma, their thoughts, their opinions. They empty themselves in public, hoping someone will gather the pieces and assemble meaning. But the higher man withholds. Not because he has nothing to say, but because not everything deserves to be spoken. He protects his inner world like a temple, and only those worthy of entry are granted the privilege of his voice. A woman intuitively senses the difference between the man who talks to impress and the man who withholds because he is rooted. She feels the weight of that difference in his gaze. He looks without seeking approval. He listens without interrupting. He is present, but not performative, and in his quiet, she hears something ancient, something primal. He does not ask for her attention. He does not need to. Attention is drawn to him like gravity, not because he demands it, but because he doesn't. Silence is not merely the absence of sound. It is the expression of dominance over oneself. The ability to be still, to observe, to resist the urge to react, is the mark of internal discipline. Most men speak to control the world outside them. But the higher man controls himself, and that control radiates. He becomes unreadable, not because he hides, but because he reveals only what he chooses to. And choice is power. In every interaction, silence creates tension, and tension, when maintained, transforms into attraction. The woman begins to question why he does not chase. Why he does not respond the way others do, why her usual tactics fall flat in front of him. And in that questioning, she becomes involved. She becomes invested. She wants to know more, not because he offered her a reason, but because he withheld one. The man who uses silence as a weapon does not wield it recklessly. He knows when to hold it and when to break it. But his default is restraint. His energy is not scattered. It is centered. He doesn't fear losing someone by not speaking, because he understands that silence draws in what is real and repels what is weak. He does not rely on persuasion, manipulation, or noise to be heard. His stillness speaks. His composure becomes the message. And to those who can hear it, that message is louder than anything words could ever express. A woman's power, subtle and relentless, often begins where a man reveals himself too easily. She learns quickly how to read the ones who need to be seen, who talk too much, who confess their desires like schoolboys, hoping to be rewarded for vulnerability. Once she understands a man, his fears, his wants, his triggers, she wraps him in an invisible thread of control. Not always with cruelty, but with instinct, because control is not always domination. It is often curiosity satisfied. And once a woman no longer wonders about a man, her grip on him tightens, then fades. The mystery dies, and so does her respect. But there exists a different kind of man, one who does not allow himself to be decoded, a man whose inner world is not placed on the table like a dinner offering, but locked behind a cold, impenetrable gaze. She studies him. She tests him. She provokes, seduces, and even withdraws to see if he will react. But he remains still. Not passive, not indifferent, but sovereign. She cannot pin him down. His silence is not emptiness. It is calculation. His presence is not a plea. It is a boundary. And in that boundary, she encounters something she cannot bend. A man who cannot be understood, cannot be controlled. He becomes a mirror in which she sees only herself, her own projections, her insecurities, her desires. He doesn't affirm her illusions, nor does he confront them. He simply reflects them back with terrifying neutrality. And the more she tries to make sense of him, the deeper she falls into her own psychological labyrinth. Because he reveals nothing, yet demands everything without saying a word. His strength lies in what he withholds, not what he offers. To understand something is to map it, to reduce it, and once named, it loses its power. The man who is named too quickly, the nice guy, the bad boy, the intellectual, becomes predictable and therefore controllable. But the one who breaks categories, who contradicts expectations, who is not seduced by clarity, becomes a riddle too costly to solve. He frustrates her, intrigues her, compels her to investigate. He exists not on her terms, but on his own. He becomes an axis around which her thoughts begin to orbit, even as he gives her no center to land upon. Women are not drawn to chaos, but to enigma. An enigma is ordered, but unknowable. The man who shows discipline, restraint, and inner control, while simultaneously revealing nothing of his emotional allegiance, becomes an enigma. He's not cold. He's contained. He's not cruel. He's selective. She cannot trap what she cannot define. He gives no obvious handle to grip, no emotional leverage to pull. And the more she realizes this, the more her usual tools fail. Many men crumble at the first sign of female disapproval. They change their tone, adjust their behavior, rush to explain themselves. They fear being misunderstood, as if misunderstanding were a death sentence. The higher man knows that misunderstanding is a tool. It grants him space to maneuver. If she cannot predict him, she cannot own him. And if she cannot own him, she must follow him. She will provoke the silent man to test him. She will say things just to draw a reaction. She wants to see if she can make him lose control, raise his voice, break his rhythm. Not because she desires conflict, because she wants to feel the limits of his soul. But when he does not flinch, when he smiles in the face of pressure, when he remains unshaken, he becomes something rare. A man whose emotions are not public property. A man who walks through storms without offering a forecast. He speaks in half sentences, not to confuse, but to invite imagination. He leaves gaps, not out of laziness, but because the gaps matter more than the answers. The woman begins to wonder, does he like me, or is he simply entertained? Is he interested, or merely polite? And while she asks these questions, he remains unmoved. She is now caught in the realm of uncertainty, and uncertainty breeds obsession. Not because he manipulated her, because she cannot map the terrain of his soul. A man becomes ungovernable when he is not emotionally obvious. She cannot shame him. She cannot guilt him into submission. He has confronted his own darkness, and so nothing she throws at him feels foreign. He does not need her validation because he has slaughtered the need for approval within himself. She senses this. She may try to possess him. Possession implies knowledge. And he is not easily known. Not because he hides, but because he does not explain. He lives in a kind of psychological nobility, untouched, unhurried, undecoded. And in that space of not knowing, her control fails. Not because she is weak, because he has made himself illegible. She cannot conquer what does not yield, cannot seduce what is not hungry, cannot direct what walks its own path. This man stands outside the emotional economy she is used to. He does not trade vulnerability for affection. He does not barter attention for intimacy. He does not speak the language of emotional dependency. He speaks through presence, through silence, through the calm assurance of a man who has buried the boy inside and rules in solitude. There is a presence some men carry that silences a room before they utter a single word. Not through fear, not through flamboyance, through an invisible weight. A kind of gravitational intensity that draws others toward them and makes women pause. This presence cannot be faked or imitated because it is not surface level. It radiates from within, from the foundation of a man who has stripped away all weakness, who has suffered in silence and emerged sharpened. It is the quiet confidence of a man who no longer seeks permission to exist. The world is drunk on verbal expression. Men are taught to explain, to apologize, to narrate every emotion like a performer on stage. But the man who operates in silence, who allows his energy to speak before his mouth ever opens, lives in an entirely different dimension. His power is not in his vocabulary, but in his being. He walks into a space without adjusting himself for comfort. He doesn't smile to be liked or speak to be seen. He is already whole, and that wholeness is felt before it is understood. Women are not fooled by words. They may be entertained by them, even charmed in fleeting moments, but they feel a man's energy long before they process his language. A weak man can learn clever phrases and calculated tones, but his energy will betray him. His posture will betray him. The slight hesitation in his eye contact, the twitch of anxiety in his voice, the overeager nature of his attention, all of it screams of a man who is not anchored. And once a woman feels that, she knows. No matter what he says, he can be moved, he can be bent, and what can be bent can be broken. Your energy must do what words cannot, must reveal that you are unshakable. This does not mean aggression or inflated ego. It means rootedness. A man who is rooted does not react. He chooses. His movements are precise, not impulsive. His gaze is steady, not frantic. His body is relaxed, not because he is indifferent, but because he is in control. A woman watching him senses that this is not a man she can play games with. Not because he is guarded, but because he is immovable. The mistake most men make is trying to impress through performance. They mistake energy for display. As if the louder they laugh, the more they gesture, the more attention they'll gather. But this kind of energy is cheap. It is the noise of the insecure. True energy is restrained. It does not beg. It does not convince. It demands respect by simply existing, and that existence casts a shadow, one that others feel before they even understand why they are drawn in. This energy comes only from internal mastery. You cannot project stillness if you are chaotic within. You cannot project certainty if your mind is full of questions. A man must first go to war with his inner self. He must confront his dependencies, his addictions to approval, his fear of rejection. He must become so familiar with solitude that he no longer shrinks in silence, but thrives in it. Only then will his energy shift. It is the man who needs nothing that attracts everything. Women are hypersensitive to energy because their survival has always depended on reading it. They listen not just to what a man says, but to what his body communicates. Is he centered or is he performing? Is he calm or is he managing impressions? A man who knows his worth does not try to display it. His posture says it. His breathing says it. The way he occupies space without explanation says it. And these things, these small, unconscious cues, speak louder than any speech could. There is a difference between attention, seeking energy, and attention, commanding energy. The former reaches outward, desperate for validation. The latter holds itself back, and in that restraint, others lean in. A woman who meets this energy senses something rare, a challenge. Not because he resists her, but because he doesn't seek her. She begins to chase, not because he asked her to, but because his stillness made her feel her own restlessness. This is where the game shifts. When a man's energy is composed, when he doesn't overinvest in outcomes, when his presence holds tension instead of dissolving into comfort, she begins to engage him differently. She tests less, observes more. She starts asking questions rather than giving answers. Her usual tactics fall short because he does not meet her in the realm of surface-level exchange. He meets her in silence, in subtlety, in depth, and in that depth she must either rise or retreat. The man whose energy speaks louder than his words never rushes. He does not interrupt. He does not need to be the center of every moment. He knows that power often rests in the unsaid, in the pause, in the way he listens. He knows that what is withheld becomes more valuable than what is revealed. He is not competing for dominance. He is simply being, and that being has the force of authority without the stench of ego. It is this paradox that draws her in a man who is fully present, yet untouchable, fully open, yet impenetrable, fully alive, yet unaffected by the need to prove it. In a world intoxicated by noise, performance, and the desperate hunger for attention, the man who remains silent, grounded, unreadable, and composed, becomes a figure of impossible power. He does not beg for approval, nor does he fight to be seen. His very presence commands attention without the need for words. He understands the one truth most men never grasp, that mystery is stronger than explanation, that restraint is more powerful than reaction, and that sovereignty begins where need ends. He does not seek to conquer a woman with charm or wit or confession. He conquers by standing alone, psychologically untouchable, emotionally self-sufficient, spiritually indifferent to her validation. She cannot shape him because he does not bend. She cannot study him because he does not display. She cannot possess him because he was never seeking to be claimed. This is the game beyond words, the silent war of presence. And only the man who has defeated the chaos within can stand still in this battlefield and win without ever lifting his voice.